When we talk about belief, we are always necessarily addressing a single claim, because you cannot necessarily demonstrate that you can have a single belief about multiple claims. So it's one claim. If the claim is some God exists, the default position, I claim, is not to accept that claim until it is supported. If the claim was no gods exist, the default position, I would say, is not to accept that claim until there's sufficient evidence. Okay.
And therefore, our default is that there is no deity. And until there is enough evidence to show that there's a deity, there's no deity.
When it comes to the topic of religion, atheism is the default position.
And today I'm going to be explaining the default position of atheism.
Welcome back to Justified Nonetheless. I am Kevin Berger, and I apply the principles of polemics and skepticism to atheism and the claims made by atheists. As you can see, the idea that non-belief is the default position is one that is commonly advanced by atheists. In this video, I discuss with ChatGPT why this characterization is disingenuous. A link for that discussion will be included in the description. I start by asking, is it true that to believe a claim, the necessary conditions for the formation of belief are 1. The presence of a brain, 2. The sufficient development and functionality of that brain, 3. The presentation of the claim, 4. A rudimentary understanding of the claim? The reply is, the conditions you've listed are a simplified way to describe the general process of forming a belief. However, it's important to note that belief formation can be influenced by a wide range of factors, including cognitive abilities, personal experience, cultural background, and more. Additionally, beliefs can be complex and may not always follow a strict set of conditions. This is a broad topic in philosophy and psychology, so there can be various perspectives on it. I ask, could belief be formed without at least the 4 criteria I mentioned having been met? And the response is, in general, it's unlikely for a belief to be formed without some form of cognitive processing, which typically requires a functioning brain, exposure to a claim, and a basic understanding of that claim. However, there can be exceptions or edge cases, such as certain cognitive biases or delusions, where beliefs may form in unusual ways or under abnormal conditions. It's important to remember that belief formation is a complex process influenced by a variety of factors. I ask, would arguing that a situation in which the necessary conditions for the formation of belief have not yet been met is evidence of absence of belief be considered a fallacy of proving too much, since it results in an absurdity? If, for example, one says that a rock has a lack of belief in a claim, would this not be an example of a fallacy of proving too much, since in the case of a rock, the necessary conditions for the formation of belief obviously have not been met? A rock has no brain and is incapable of belief. And the answer to that is, yes, you're correct. Arguing that a situation where the necessary conditions for belief formation have not been met is evidence of absence of belief can indeed be considered an example of the fallacy of proving too much. This is because it leads to an absurd conclusion, such as asserting that a rock lacks belief. In this case, the argument is applying a concept, belief, to a situation where it clearly does not apply, inanimate objects like rocks, which leads to unreasonable or absurd outcome. I ask, similarly, because fish, for example, do not have the capacity to understand claims as we do, to say that a fish lacks belief in a claim would also be a fallacy of proving too much. Correct? And the answer is, yes, that's correct. Asserting that a fish lacks belief in a claim due to its inability to understand claims in the way humans do would be an example of fallacy of proving too much. This is because it applies a concept, belief, to a situation where it may not be applicable, in this case, a fish's cognitive capacity, leading to an unreasonable or absurd conclusion. Belief formation is influenced by cognitive abilities, and it's important to consider the relevant context and capacity of the entity in question. I ask, would the same apply to a baby for the same reason? They do not have the cognitive capacity for this either. And the answer is yes, that's correct. A similar reasoning would apply to babies. Due to their limited cognitive development, it would be unreasonable to assert that a baby lacks belief in a claim in the same way that adults do. Belief formation is dependent on cognitive capacity, so it's important to consider the relevant context of the capabilities of the entity in question. So I ask, is it nonsensical then to refer to one's state prior to the fulfillment of the necessary conditions an absence of belief, since this is a misrepresentation of what belief is and how it functions? And the response is, the term absence of belief is often used in philosophical discussions to describe a state where a person or entity has not yet formed a belief on a particular proposition. It's a way of indicating that they neither affirm nor deny the proposition. However, it's important to understand that this term is used within the context of philosophical discourse and may not necessarily align with everyday language usage. That being said, if we were to apply the concept of absence of belief to entities or situations where belief formation is not applicable, for example, inanimate objects like rocks, it would lead to confusion or misunderstanding, as it may not accurately represent the nature of belief in those cases. It's crucial to use terminology in a way that aligns with the context and understanding of belief formation. To which I say, do you agree then that the default position is not an absence of belief, but pristine nescience of that belief, of that claim? For example, according to the gumball analogy, the default position is to believe neither that there are an even nor that there are an odd number of gumballs. However, the default position would be to be unaware of the jar of gumballs. Likewise, according to the courtroom analogy, the default position is not guilty. However, the default position would actually be to be unaware that anyone has been charged with a crime. And the response to that is, yes, I understand your point. In these analogies, the default position is characterized by a lack of information or awareness about the specific claim or situation. This state of pristine nescience or lack of awareness is different from actively holding an absence of belief. In the gumball analogy, the default position is not having a belief about the number of gumballs because there's no information available. Similarly, in the courtroom analogy, the default position of not guilty is based on the presumption of innocence. But if someone had no knowledge of the court case at all, they wouldn't even have a position of not guilty. Your distinction highlights that the default position depends on specific context and the information available to the individual or entity. It's an interesting perspective to consider in discussions about belief and default positions. In summary, as you can see from the discussion, because beliefs are propositional attitudes toward claims, and one cannot logically hold any such position, whether in favor of, in opposition to, or even apathetic toward a claim without being aware of what the claim is, and the necessary conditions for the formation of belief having been met, to characterize this default state as non-belief becomes a fallacy of proving too much, as it results in absurdity. To not accept a claim may very well be the null hypothesis in a scientific perspective. It demonstrably is not the default position. The default position is to be unaware of the claim. It's pristine nescience. So, with that in mind, remember always, even if your beliefs are not necessarily true, they should be justified nonetheless.